global manufacturing slowing down in a big way. We spoke about China, how it's a huge minus for China. But what about India? Because India, under the Make in India campaign, is positioning itself to be the next most prominent manufacturing hub, taking away market share from China.
Well, I think it will take away market share from China by attracting investment, partly Chinese investment, by the way, which seeks to diversify the way in which global supply chains are structured. Because if you have more originators of product in a global supply chain, then the risk of a political event or a pandemic or whatever you want as an exogenous event, the risk of that disruption will be less because you're diversifying the actual input ends of the global supply chain. And that is what India is looking to position itself in. But there is a huge difference between the Chinese model and the Indian model. The Chinese model was based on attracting foreign technology into special development zones, which then had a ripple effect on the whole economy. But the products themselves were actually based on achieving global market share, not domestic market share. And that is how the Chinese created the centers of excellence, which actually rippled out and then created the huge lift in Chinese prosperity. The Indian story is different. It actually is about domestic market creation and domestic market development. It is much less, I believe, in the long term, an export and manufacturing driven model than China's still is. So the Indian really model depends for success upon the reform of the domestic economy being successful. And I think on that front, India will continue to make progress, but it will be a slow and steady progress and not at all similar to the Chinese model. And it will not be a globalized economic model. It will be a domestically driven economic model, except for the globalized supply chain, for which India will be a diversified component.
Sure. So you're of the belief that India will not replace China as the motor of globalization. But look at that chart there. That's a 10-year chart on India versus the Shenzhen Composite, right? Both broader indices in their respective regions. And the last 10 years has also been a reflection of Prime Minister Modi's policies to shore up not just domestic demand, but also create that manufacturing center for under the Make in India campaign for India. And so how do you read into the premium that investors are ascribing to this market at these levels as Prime Minister Modi completes his second term?
Yes. Well, I think the premium is to do with the fact that India was coming from much further back in the development story than China. And of course, it is catching up on China because China is virtually stagnating. But China is stagnating at a later stage of development than India. So the fact that the Indian model is going to be driven much more by domestic factors than global trade factors does not rule out that the Indian model could generate the sort of returns for investors which China cannot do. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is India can do all that, but we have to be aware that the Indian model is not one which is going to replace China as a player to the same extent or proportion in international trade. That I don't think is going to happen.